Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by LawVu, LawVu's community for in-house legal professionals, where we dive into the heart of the legal profession to bring you unfiltered discussions with industry titans on a broad spectrum of topics.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm David Lancelot, the CLO and EVP Advocacy at LawVu, and I have the great pleasure to have with me here today Brian Martin, the CLO of Nutanix. Brian is also I think you're an adjunct, is that right, at Stanford?
Well, they refer to it as an instructor.
An instructor, righto. So Brian also teaches at Stanford a course called The Role of the General Counsel. So if his probably decades in GC roles, along with his teaching qualifications weren't enough, now he's here on the Legal Leaders Podcast. So thank you so much for being here, Brian.
No, thank you for having me.
And where are you coming from today?
Pleasanton, California. Where my home? Working from home today.
Awesome. Pleasanton. I actually didn't realize you lived out in Pleasanton. It's a lovely part of the world.
Yes, and a restaurant that I'm invested in called Sidetrack. So if anyone wants to head out there, give me a call ahead of time. I'll meet you there.
Awesome. All right. Well, I know what I'm doing on the weekend. Sidetrack. Fantastic. Thank you again for being with us here today. So, Brian, I think we first met in person at the Running Legal Like a Business conference. Is that right?
That's right.
In Las Vegas at the lovely Fontainebleau resort in Las Vegas. And I think you and I both probably were enamored with the title of that conference.
Yeah, and I think what I remember from meeting you is we had a very interesting conversation about sort of basic principles or regarding legal departments, why companies have them, and then the implications for that. And it was one of these dinners where I didn't think that I would get into such sort of deep and intelligent conversation. It's usually just dinner conversation, but I thought it was a great conversation, and I think something that's worthy of sort of expounding upon here today.
I totally agree, Brian, and I think it's fair to say that I am that person who, if you are unlucky enough to sit next to me at dinner, will go quickly from hello, who are you, to what do you think about the future of in-house legal practice? Because it's just my passion, right? It's something that I'm really, really interested in, super invested in, and I know you are too. So to be at a conference like that with a title like that, and to get to sit next to somebody like you who's both deeply experienced in the profession over a considerable period of time during its evolution, as well as teaching on it. And to me, that often means you've had time to think about those principles, right? You're not just operating day to day as a lot of us just have to, but you've had time to step back and sort of think like, why am I here? Why are we here? What's the purpose of this whole thing? So a really great way to meet. And then I had the incredible honor to get invited to your team offsite in San Francisco.
Yeah, I think as with lots of legal departments, the legal teams are very interested to hear how others are thinking about the issues that they face every day. And so we had a GC panel, and it was a great way to bring external perspectives to some of the issues that we have, and I thank you for doing that. I think the feedback we got from the team, and I guess this is something to suggest to your listeners and your viewers, is that when you are getting together, to have this external perspective is really a great way to benchmark, to understand strategies, to understand even career paths and how people made certain choices. And I think it validates a lot, it challenges a lot, and thank you for doing that.
Oh, my pleasure. I definitely have said this to you before and to others. It really is my favorite thing to go into that environment, right? Like when you're leading a function and we're all so, deep into it, partnering with the business, doing really cool stuff. But there's very little time there to take a step back and think about, like, are we doing this role in a cutting edge, modern, engaging and exciting way, and to have an opportunity to take some time, bring people together, talk about sort of first principles, talk about the purpose. It's just a great way to spend the week, to engage the team, and to really, I think, drive the entire profession forward.
Yeah, and back to the teaching, because I know you do a lot of it yourself. One of the things that's quite apparent is law students are very interested in learning about the in-house practice as career opportunities or as a way to build empathy for when they're in law firms and dealing with clients and in-house teams. We've never had a situation where the class was undersubscribed. We always had to make choices and have a wait list. It's a topic that I think is gaining interest at a number of different law schools. I know you know some others that teach classes, and I do as well. It's a great topic for law students.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes, my humble opinion is that it comes from a realization that such a significant portion of the legal profession is now in-house or is working, as you said, with in-house, right? You're either going to a law firm or you're going in-house. Maybe you're going in government practice, but in all of these different, maybe you're a judge. All of those different areas, you're dealing with companies, and those companies, your main point of contact is often their lawyers. And having an understanding of what that is, what that practice means, how to go about it in a modern way, is just becoming more and more and more valuable to graduating law students. So I think it's a really, really valuable area for law schools to expand into.
Yeah, I started teaching.
And I'm sure that's why they have you there.
Yeah, I started teaching for a different reason. It was around, some people may remember when a lot of Silicon Valley companies got caught up in a stock option backdating accounting scandal. And a lot of the in-house lawyers were criticized, if not criminally pursued or pursued by the bar associations and the like. And it occurred to me that there really was not a lot of discussion about the unique ethical issues that face in-house lawyers. And I sort of turned that interest into a law school class, and it was mostly around ethics. And, what's your obligations when the CEO disagrees with you? What happens if, the board disagrees with you? What do you do? And it was sort of on the also inspired by some of the reflections on where were the lawyers around things like Enron and some of the other corporate implosions at the time. And the ABA struggled at that time with this, hey, lawyers are ever present, in-house lawyers are ever present. What do we want them to do in these situations? Anyway, so that was the initial inspiration for my class. And I taught that at SUNY Buffalo for my alma mater for several years. And then with COVID, I actually had the opportunity to teach remotely. And I taught at Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge, which, of course, teaching from Pleasanton to Baton Rouge was a great experience. But that was more of a basic ethics course, I guess, preparing the students for the MPRE. And then the Stanford class was really a broader class on the role of the general counsel.
Yep. And I think it's just a fascinating and valuable piece of work you're doing there. And my students, I'm sure you get the same kind of feedback, right? That it's one of the most, if not the most valuable course they've taken. Of course, they're self-selecting because they're interested in in-house practice. And of course, it is probably the most valuable course that they'll get in law school. So kudos to you and to everybody else who's making their way into that area of teaching. Maybe we switch gears a bit,
Yep.
Brian, and before we talk about the purpose of the function, which I'm excited to talk about too, we get a bit of your backstory just to build a foundation for why we should all listen to your opinions on that topic. So how did you get into legal practice in the first place?
It's actually a story that goes back to when I was a child. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. My parents were, I guess we were solidly sort of blue-collar, middle-class family. My dad's company, however, as lots of companies did in the 70s, pulled out of, it was in manufacturing. I worked at a factory, and they pulled out of town quite suddenly, and so he found himself unemployed. One of the things that they used to like to do is to go down to the courthouse and watch trials. And there is interesting drama that occurs every day in courthouses, as we know. And so they just truly enjoyed that. And one day they took me out of class and said, "Why don't you come with us?" And I was sitting in that courtroom, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is it." And since then, I was really sort of vectoring towards a legal career. And out of law school, I worked at a couple of law firms, and then my first in-house job in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then my first in-house job was out here in California working for Sun Microsystems, which is a company that at its height had over 300 attorneys, and I was hired into that group, and rotated around to lots of different jobs when I was there, and that sort of, I think, made me qualified to be a credible GC candidate. And I was hired. My first GC job was with a semiconductor equipment company called KLA Tencor. I think now it's just known as KLA. I should say that Sun, I had teams ranging from 10 to well over 100 attorneys. Wow. KLA was because of their business, it didn't really require a huge legal team. There wasn't a huge go-to-market function because it had very specialized products and customers. And so there, I think the team was at its height 16. I was there for 8 years until I moved to Juniper Networks, where my team was about 140. I was there for 6 years, went to a startup where I became a team of one, which I learned how to do non-disclosure agreements all over again. But it was such an interesting transition from such a large team to just sort of being on my own. But after 3 years of doing that, I looked for something maybe closer to what I had experienced before at KLA and Juniper, and Nutanix worked out. So that's where I've been for about 7 months now. So,
right on.
So that's the career trajectory.
And I mean, just to give people some perspective, Sun Microsystems, you were there in, is it 96?
Yeah.
1996?
Yeah, that's right.
You started at Sun. So this is just before, I guess you'd say, before the dot-com boom, like a year or two.
Well, it was certainly gaining steam. It was a time. Yeah. It was so funny because I moved from Pittsburgh, which I think certainly had shed its Rust Belt sort of veneer. So there was a lot going on there. But to come into Silicon Valley at that time and just see what was happening, and an attitude that anything was possible, that any idea was a good idea and should be funded and should be invested in. And of course, I think later on people refer to that as irrational exuberance. And maybe it was, but it was also a very exciting time to be in the area, because there was a lot of companies that are now household names that were incubated then. That was just it was such an eye opener. You could feel it. And then, of course, just a few years later, the irrational exuberance came home, and it was just a bit of a different environment. I used to measure the backup at the Dumbarton Bridge as my barometer for how the economy was doing. But it was also very interesting because my time at Sun was sort of bridged both periods, and how we rewarded people, how we talked to people, how we managed the team. Certainly, we had to do a lot of layoffs on the back end of my experience there. But it taught me a lot as a manager for how to deal with the situation where some of the perks were just not available and not responsibly available to managers like they were during the go-go days.
Right on. And I think it's fair to say that Sun was providing a lot of the technology that a lot of the dot-com businesses were using to exist, right? Back in the day when, I can remember as well, you had to actually buy things and own them and run them yourself, right? Before you could just flip a switch on somebody else's data center. So a lot of that technology was Sun technology, and Sun eventually became, is it Oracle?
Yeah, Oracle purchased them.
Eventually became part of Oracle, and I think just from, Silicon Valley nerd stuff, is it the Sun campus that is now the Meta campus?
That's correct. And there's a sign out front of Meta, which has, I think, the infamous thumbs up, or maybe, I don't know if it still does, but it has a Meta sign. But if you go to the backside of that sign, you see the old Sun Microsystems sign. And
no way.
Yes, and the rumor is that Mark Zuckerberg decided to leave that exposed and to leave it there as a reminder that nothing's truly durable if you lose sight of technology trends. If you if you don't sort of stay sort of on plan, time the market right, and the like. So I've had some pictures taken on the backside of that sign.
That is fantastic. Yeah. I did not know that. I'll have to check that out next time I'm over there.
Yeah,
yeah, that's really, really interesting, especially now, right? Like, as we're recording this, the DeepSeek AI, situation is absolutely exploding in the news and in the markets, and everybody thought they were on top, and now all of a sudden disruption, right? And I've seen that personally myself in multiple times, right? Like I used to work at QVC, the TV shopping channel, before there was internet shopping, right?
Yeah.
Like the disruption comes all the time, and I actually talk to my my law students about this, like all the talk about AI disrupting the legal profession. Like there's always been disruption. The legal profession has been disrupted multiple times. This is another disruption. And I think for them, my guidance to them is, embrace and get ahead of it and get excited about it, as opposed to saying, oh no, we're all going to be offshored, or oh no, we're not going to be able to use our quill pens anymore. But that's the Valley. It's an exciting place to be. So you're at Sun, and I think that's probably the days of a transition for the in-house practice. And as we've had this conversation previously about how in a couple of different places in probably the United States, in that time frame between 96 and mid, getting up to 2005, 6, 7, 8, there's a transition between a way of doing in-house legal practice and a new way of doing in-house legal practice. Can you talk to me about your experience in that time?
You know what? I'm not sure that I understand the question.
So the way things were more like a private practice focus in, say, early 2000s or even in the mid 90s, and changing to be more of a business partnering focus in the late 2000s-ish.
Yeah, and I think this really comes back to the legal team as a choice. I mean, why do you why does a company invest in a legal team in the first place?
Sure.
And I think it's such a helpful and a useful way to just remind ourselves of that there's lots of choices out there for the provision of legal services. You have, law firms, you have alternative legal service providers, and then you have the in-house team. And while I think maybe it's a bit of an overstatement that a legal department's a choice, certainly anytime that we go in for more resources and ask for another attorney or another legal professional, that choice becomes apparent. The questions become, hey, what's the ROI? What are we going to get out of this? Do we really need someone there full time? Can we just go to a law firm when the issue comes up? And so we have these discussions where we have to, advocate for a position. And certainly that's where the choice comes home to roost. And legal, I think we've gotten to a place now where a well-functioning legal team is right at home in the corporate setting. That's not even debated anymore. Still, we just can't forget the idea, or we should not neglect the fact that there's choices that are being made as to what that team does, how it's resourced, and that has implications for what your day-to-day is like. I think of it a bit of a different way that I think I think is worthy of some discussion here, and that is, what if our business teams could put out an RFP for the legal work, and we had to compete for it? And you could see in some strange way that, if the procurement team had its way, maybe they would want us to do it. Maybe we wanted to do it that way. But it again, it reinforces the idea that we should not take for granted that we're going to continue to be resourced at the same level, or we'll get additional resources. That leads me, I think, to a conclusion that the reason why you win those RFPs or that competition is that the legal team is operating at a level that is a competitive advantage to the company. And what do I mean by that? You win, you're invested in because you know the business. You're invested in because you have substantive expertise, but you also understand the context in which you're, practicing. You know the people. You know how they like to communicate, their taste for risk, all of that stuff. You know what's going on in the industry, and you have a network that you can pick up the phone and say, hey, how does this work? How are you guys doing this? Staying attuned with what others are doing. And so to operate at that level, I think you constantly need to be asking yourself, are you doing the things that get you there? Are you investing in the things that allow you to be a competitive advantage? I call it the 5 questions, and I have no illusion that my teams aren't asking themselves the 5 questions expressly, but I do think that you should reflect on, what have I done this week to better understand the business? Have you read white papers that are coming out? Do you understand the products? Find someone that can teach you technology for dummies if you need it, and have them explain it to you. Because if not, you're not even at the starting line, right? So but that's a constant investment. And at my company at Nutanix, there's marketing collateral. There's all sorts of things that you can be reading. What have I done this week to better understand my business partners? And I think this is something that I think was really hard during COVID. A lot of us are now moving back into the offices, so maybe this will become a little easier. But you have to spend time with people to understand how they think about issues, how to be a better business partner with them. I sort of think of it, Dave, it's sort of like the experience that you have when you fly or travel with somebody, like with one of your business partners. You get to know them, you hear about their family, you just get a sense for what drives them and how they solve problems or think about things. And I think once you have that context, then you can build that relationship and work with that person. But I think you have to be mindful about it. So that's I think that's something you have to constantly be investing in. And I think you have to do things like, hey, let's go to lunch, or hey, just calling to say hi, or just checking in. If everything is just, let me tell you the 5 things I'm working on, and you're just talking about business stuff, I don't think you sort of get that familiarity.
100%.
Number 3 is what are you doing to better understand the broader context? What are competitors doing? What are the customers looking for? What problems are you solving for the customers? What are their issues? And again, I think that provides context for you to have a seat at the table. The next one is, what have I done this week to maintain my substantive expertise? What am I doing to be that subject matter expert? Now, granted, there's some things that we will always send to outside counsel because it just doesn't make sense there's some specialties out there, and we sort of get it. Like we don't litigate cases. I've never worked at a company that did their own litigation, right? But
Sure.
but still, you can't be carrying around dated understanding of the law, and you really need to stay current. My company invests in some all-you-can-eat CLE kinds of things. Law firms can be helpful in this regard. There's lots of different strategies there, but you have to sort of do that. And then the final question is, what have I done this week to better build my network? Am I going to bar association or ACC events? Are you involved with some nonprofits, or just what are you doing to sort of continue to build that network? And that's so good on so many different levels, including career development, issue awareness, ways that you can benchmark. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked as a general counsel, well, what are other people doing? And you have to have the ability to do that. So I think if you're constantly investing in these sort of things, if you're mindfully investing in making sure that you're doing those things, you can operate at a competitive advantage level, and therefore really justifying why it is the company would say, yeah, you know what, that's a group we want to invest in. That's a team that we want to invest in, because what they're giving to us is not just legal, it's so much more. That, to me, again, that's why they invest in a legal team.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and as you know, when we had that conversation, I can actually still remember very clearly being in a sort of small circle in a very large room at this conference, right? Being with some of the people who I'm just like, wow, I get to talk to Ron, Bill, and Brian Martin, and Jeff Franke, and Paula Pepin all at the same time. And they're all talking about legal as a competitive advantage. And I was just like, oh, finally it's happening, right? Like the sort of cutting edge practitioners, all practitioners, right, are kind of agreeing on what I would call a nomenclature, right? Like the purpose of the function is to do this, and your list of 5 things, right, is a great way to encapsulate, like, it's not just substantive reactive lawyering. It's a whole raft of things that, we are now teaching in law school, right? So I feel like we're at this kind of tipping point where some of the top people in the industry are coming together and going, okay, we agree on this. What more can we do? And that's the thing that I want to sort of promulgate, right? Like record and share, so that new lawyers, existing counsel, and I have to say, like, outside of some of these markets and sectors that we operate in, where it's almost like, well, this is the de facto standard now. They may not be operating in that environment, but as you say, being able to point to a third party, to a credible third party, and say, this is the way, I should operate too as a new GC or a new member of a legal team, is a very powerful and sort of validating way to think about things, right? So
one of my colleagues suggested a good way of measuring whether or not you are operating at that level is to ask, what meetings are you getting invited to? Are you seen as just legal? Is it we'll call you when a legal issue arises, or are you a problem solver? Are you somebody who has invested in yourself enough to sit at the table and help solve problems? And I think that's such a great way of thinking about it and doing a check.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, that's that. There's some people who you just are like, man, I quote you all the time. That clearly somebody who's got that magic, because that is exactly right. I can still remember at eBay, like being one of my sort of proudest accomplishments in my early days there, and probably still now because I'm talking about it, was getting invited to the business team offsite. It was just like, and this is somewhere where in this particular team, early on, I heard over the cubicle wall, "Don't tell legal," right? So to go from there to come to Carmel Valley, and still, this is how I was still learning, right? So I was like, okay, I can only come for like one day though, because I'm so busy, right? Can you imagine? And that mindset, that mentality still exists, and I've certainly seen it in private practice, right? Like where it's like, I'll be at a team meeting in a law firm building, and some of the law firm lawyers will show up for 30 minutes, an hour. Oh, I got to get back to work. Like, you realize that this thing here is the most valuable thing you could be doing with your time, right? Like being at the leadership team of a business offsite is just so powerful, so valuable. Yeah,
and I think it's a good message for law firm lawyers as well. I think if you, and I have talked to groups of associates, and I said, you can do the same thing. You could take that same approach about learning about your clients and, making it easier for people to pick up the phone or to have a conversation with somebody about what's going on in the business. So I don't think it's just confined, or the idea of this investment is not just confined to those that are in-house. And I think it's a really handy model for anyone that wants to engage with the business. I love the story that you told about, the getting invited to the business offsite. And I think that sometimes it's hard to measure how you've arrived, or if you are operating as a competitive advantage. And there's metrics. I think we've done a better job in the in-house community for bringing data to bear and using metrics for and demonstrating that we're efficient and so on. I think that as it relates to whether you're operating as a competitive advantage, discussions about resources, invitations to meetings, the kinds of confidential discussions that you have, the confidences that people share with you, and those sort of things are, I think, a way of checking in and going, hey, look, I must be doing something right here. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that I think that sometimes maybe my voice or my familiarity is around larger legal teams. I know that as teams are smaller, there's less time to do some of the things that I've talked about because you tend to become very transactional. When I was a one-person legal team, I certainly didn't have a lot of time for lunch or for the kinds of things that I talked about. Having said that, if you can create a brand where people realize that you are invested in the business, that you are there to move the business forward, it sometimes really, it's very cool to see people's eyes open up and say, oh, okay, so this is not just the lawyer or the person that keeps me out of jail. I love that one. But that you're so much more. And so you can do that as a one-person, legal team or from a large one. And so I don't think it's just confined to the domain of large legal teams where you can spend time reading white papers and go into lunches and things like that. I think.
No, I agree completely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of defining and understanding and being confident about what the role actually is, right? And somebody much wiser than me said, and I think you probably know them, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but like that legal is the only function really that can define what it does, like what its scope is, right? Because we determine with partnership with the business and sign off from the CFO, you can say, we're not going to look at that stuff, right? We don't have to do everything. So it's a matter of having the confidence, I think, to say our role is this, and a big part of our job is understanding where the business is going, doing the predictive analytics with the data and the qualitative understanding of strategy to say, if we just do a little right rudder here, we're not going to hit that iceberg in 6 months. But to do that, to ever get to that place, you have to be able to say, there is a way to do this job, and the job is to be a competitive advantage to the business, right? So I think, as you've been saying and others that we've been talking about, understanding what your purpose is first.
And I think something that I don't know that we talk a lot about, although we should, is how do we interview our potential employers to determine whether there's an environment that eventually can become receptive to that, or that there isn't some kind of experience with lawyers where that just may take the kind of effort that maybe someone doesn't necessarily want to plow that ground or so on. And I think that we don't talk a lot about what are the best questions a GC candidate should have for a CEO, a CFO, about the environment, about the receptivity about the opportunity. I just think that that's an area that's sort of ripe for discussion.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and the how and I've seen recently, I've had a bunch of guest speakers from my class in Gainesville, and how do you approach the looking for a new role process, the interviewing process, and that sort of 30, 60, 90, 180 process to say, coming in, and I think this is traditionally, and still in a lot of places, the GC, CLO, or even just the first lawyer traditionally wouldn't come in and go, okay, this is how you should think about legal. You know what I mean? They would just come in and just hammer, right? Like, because that's what lawyers do. That is the traditional private practice model of, we just work our butts off, we'll be here late, we'll get as much done as possible. Anything that comes at us, we'll work on it as fast as we can. So I think we're having a sort of, as I said previously, like a tipping point where it's like, okay, the best in-house lawyers and the best legal leaders come in and actually say, this is what the profession is now. This is why you hired me.
Yeah.
This is the purpose.
Exactly right.
And that purpose is to be a competitive advantage. And to quote my friend Megan Niedermeyer, good legal functions support the business, and great legal functions accelerate the business. And, I think we're seeing that more and more becoming I'd like to think, and I'm interested, because you said you talked to private practice lawyers, talking to the people who are hiring legal leaders. Like, how do we get the message across to them that this is it's not just about having tons and tons of experience and having worked with boards and public companies. It's actually that you understand what the purpose of the function is. How do we get that message across?
Maybe just by demonstrating it. And I think that if you approach the role with empathy, with humility, with the idea that important to functioning at that level are relationships that you build. Hopefully that opens doors to conversations where you can demonstrate that your skills are applicable across an array of issues, not just legal issues. And so I think it's a mindset of the GC or prospective GC about how they're going to show up and and it may be the case that you need to lead the way or demonstrate an investment, and hopefully that opens up the two-way street where the magic happens.
Yep. Yeah. It's a sort of conundrum, and I mean, I'm sure you've run into this, right? Like I think you just mentioned it. This idea that people have a preconception because it's true. They've dealt with lawyers in the past, and so when you come in as this, I'm going to be this great business partner, and they're thinking, don't tell legal. Legal's going to stop everything. They always stop everything. They, and I think this is actually true. Like lawyers get so busy, in-house lawyers, because they're not in private practice. They're not paid by the hour. They get so busy that they can use risk to manage workload. They can have such a low risk tolerance to say, no, we shouldn't do that. Not necessarily because we shouldn't do that, but because I just don't have time to even think about doing that, right? Like I'm totally overwhelmed. So running into business leaders, how do you start that conversation? I
don't know how to start the conversation, but what I would say though is that if you take that mindset of being a competitive advantage, you're going to be able to have more nuanced conversations. You're going to be able to show, your value better than someone who doesn't do that. Because I think a lot of times there's going to be some environments where either through experience or just a misunderstanding of the function, or I used to watch Matlock or whatever it was, right? That, there's going to be this idea of maybe, there was a bad experience. And I think you might have to break through that. But the way you break through it is how you show up. And, I think, that sound effect that's used often about a needle scratching across a record, which symbolizes like suddenly something changed or something stopped.
Yep.
Hopefully by, showing up as a competitive advantage, showing up as a business partner, doing the things that we talked about, you're going to hear that across the various business offices, that sound effect, because you've just changed their perception of what you're there for. And I think people that are committed to this, that's the breakthrough. That's the breakthrough. And I think, again, the fact that a lawyer can come into a business meeting and speak meaningfully about a product, about a customer, about a competitive dynamic, about a roadmap, those are the barrier breakers. And as I said, I think that's why they've invested in us. That's why they invested in the team. Otherwise, look, have an outside counsel call into the board meeting or to the CEO staff meeting or a division staff meeting. They can answer the legal questions. Totally.
Yeah. Yes, the value add is exactly that, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. When you're talking about that sort of record scratch, I'm viscerally feeling that, when you're in that place and you feel like, that they're getting it now. They're getting it now. Sometimes it's a hard slog, and I think especially when you're in these bigger organizations, it's like you've convinced this small team in Canada. And then they give you a little bit more, and they're like, "Oh boy, okay. Now I gotta convince these emerging market guys. They're way more, off the piece than those Canadians." And then you gotta convince, and you just keep working your way up, right, until you get to a point where you can role model it for the organization and even externally.
One of the guest speakers into our class shared an experience with a board where he came in and, he was sort of counseled just to listen, to just be in student mode. That he was new to the company, the feedback he got after the meeting was, "Hey, the board thinks you're too quiet." And so the way that he handled that or internalized that feedback was not that he then suddenly opined on various matters in the board meeting. I think that's a tricky dance there, but at breaks or during the dinner with the board and so on, he would engage with them and start building relationships, and through that, they found some common ground. They realized that why he was there and what he was capable of. And I love that story because sometimes, you can't sort of force it. But if you build the relationships, you find common ground, you start having dialogues, these things will provide those openings to really demonstrate your value.
Wise words. Well, I think, Brian, we could go on, and I'm sure we will. I'm looking forward to our next conversation already. Not sure when I'm going to see you again, but soon, I hope. I really appreciate you being here and talking to us. This has been the Legal Leaders Podcast. Brian Martin, CLO of Nutanix. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you all again soon.
It's my pleasure. What a great conversation with you.
Thanks, Brian. Cheers.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit follow and leave us a review on your listening platform of choice. We love engaging with our community and hearing from you, so please head to inview.lawvu.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.